It was only her first week at Nebula Academy, yet Maya Vega could feel the weight of every curious gaze as she made her way through the gleaming hallways. Nebula Academy was unlike anything she had ever experienced, a prestigious institution orbiting in the frigid emptiness of Sector 12 Starlon. It was the pinnacle of galactic education, a beacon that attracted students from star systems far and wide. For Mira, who'd only ever known Earth, it felt as if she'd been thrust into an ocean of strangers, alien in every sense. Students drifted down the Academy's sprawling glass corridors, their uniforms displaying a spectrum of colors to signify their planetary origins. Holographic screens shimmered on the walls, cycling through planetary updates, assignments, and the latest interstellar news. It was overwhelming, but Myra's instincts kicked in. She would keep her head held high, fit in but never back down. Her father had advised her before she left Earth. Now, under all those scrutinizing eyes, she resolved to do just that. However, Nebula Academy had its challengers, three in particular, who had taken an immediate interest in her. They blocked her path at the end of the corridor, their presence as notorious as any galactic threat. Rak, Lyra, and Voss, the names circulated through the Academy with a reputation for menace. They were an unusual alliance of species, unified by a shared intolerance for weakness and, now, by their focused curiosity toward Mira. Rak was impossible to miss, a towering Zuran with deep blue skin, his powerful physique rippling beneath his Academy uniform as he leaned against the transparent barrier, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Beside him was Lyra, a Sueon whose crystalline skin caught the light, scattering it in faint rainbows. Her delicate appearance was deceptive. Behind it lay a razor-sharp wit and a cutting demeanor. Finally, there was Voss, a Vor, his silver skin gleaming, and his narrowed eyes suggesting a mastery of subtle telepathy that made him the most dangerous of the three. Well, look who's decided to join us, Rak said, his deep voice carrying a mocking edge as he stepped forward to block her way. Mira kept her expression neutral and tried to move past him, but Lyra's slender arm extended, halting her with an unspoken authority. Humans are supposed to be delicate, aren't they? Lyra's voice rang out, cold and sharp. So breakable, so earthbound. Mira met her gaze, her jaw set in defiance. I just need to get to my class, she replied, her tone steady, hiding the irritation simmering beneath. Voss tilted his head, an unsettling smile creeping across his face. Ah, class, consider this a lesson, Earthling, he murmured, his telepathic presence brushing against her mind. Strength is the only currency here. You might want to learn that sooner rather than later. She could feel his telepathic influence press against her thoughts, an insidious nudge to make her feel insignificant, to urge her into submission. But Mira wasn't about to give in so easily. She had prepared herself well for moments like this. After all, she was a para-champion, not only in technique but in mental fortitude. Para was more than just overcoming obstacles. It was about reshaping the world around her, seeing new paths where others only saw barriers. With a measured breath, Mira took in her surroundings, her training springing to life. Her eyes scanned the polished metal beams, the humming conveyor belt nearby that glided through open space. Nebula Academy might be unfamiliar, but to Mira, it was as much a playground as any urban setting back on Earth. Her lips curved into a smirk, her gaze sharpening. You three know nothing about real strength, and with that, she took off. The trio's shock was palpable as Mira suddenly surged forward. She jumped onto the edge of the conveyor, her foot finding just the right angle for maximum momentum. With each stride, she gained speed, feeling the thrill of the chase as Rak's growl echoed behind her, the other two close on his heels. But Mira had no intention of slowing down. Up ahead, she spotted a series of neon-lit pillars spaced in a perfect sequence for her next move. Without hesitation, she pushed off the conveyor, launching herself into the air, twisting fluidly as she soared over the first pillar. The sensation was exhilarating, the freedom, the lightness. Earth's gravity was far more punishing. Here, in the Academy's controlled atmosphere, her movements felt nearly weightless. Don't let her get away, Rak's voice boomed, but Mira was already several pillars ahead, leaping smoothly from one to the next. The Academy's vast, transparent corridors opened up to the sweeping starscape beyond, a stunning view that was both intimidating and inspiring. For a brief moment, Mira caught her reflection as she glided through the air, a lone figure against the backdrop of the endless galaxy, chased by three relentless adversaries who had underestimated her. Lyra, the quickest of the three, was closing in, her crystalline limbs reflecting the ambient light like shards of glass. Mira knew she couldn't afford a single misstep. Every leap, every pivot had to be perfect. Ahead, the main corridor continued continued in a sleek, straight line, but off to the left was a narrow, unmarked maintenance passage, likely reserved for Academy personnel. It would be a tight fit, but she could manage. Lyra, however, would have to slow down if she wanted to follow. Perfect. Mira vaulted over the next pillar, twisting in midair to land precisely at the narrow entrance. She ducked low, casting a quick glance behind her just in time to catch Lyra's frustrated expression as she realized she'd lost ground. "What's wrong?" Mira called back, a mischievous grin forming. "Afraid of cracking that glass skin?" For an instant, she saw fury flash across Lyra's face, but Mira was already slipping away, a surge of triumph pulsing through her. She raced down the cramped passage, twisting and turning with ease to dodge hanging cables and metal supports, her mind sharp and focused on the path ahead. The steady rhythm of her own breath became Myra's anchor, a beat to center her focus as she moved through the dim, narrow passage. She rounded a sharp corner only to find her path blocked by a network of pipes. Without hesitation, she leapt up, hands gripping the metal as she swung herself over, landing with effortless grace on the other side. The rush of the chase, the freedom of movement, this was her territory, her strength. As she continued, something unsettling caught her attention in the reflective surface of a glass panel beside her. Voss was no longer in sight, but his presence lingered like a shadow in her mind. His voice, low and mocking, echoed in her head, "Running won't save you, human." A chill ran down her spine as she felt his telepathic reach, probing for fears and vulnerabilities. Mira clenched her jaw, forcing herself to focus. She wouldn't let him in. Her resolve was stronger than his influence. Then, she heard it, the soft click of metal, Rack's heavy footsteps approaching. He must have taken a different route, some shortcut, and now stood directly in her way. Her pulse quickened. The end of the passage was within reach, but Rack's massive form blocked her exit, his eyes glinting with smug satisfaction. "Looks like it's over, human," he sneered, stretching out one of his powerful arms to grab her. Myra's mind raced, analyzing her surroundings for an escape. Her gaze fell on the glass wall beside her, revealing the endless stretch of stars beyond. In that instant, she knew what she had to do. With a burst of daring, she threw herself toward the glass. The Academy's security systems activated immediately, a safety shield materializing to prevent a breach just as she slid through a narrow gap. She landed in the adjacent corridor, leaving Rack momentarily stunned on the other side of the shield. In the silence that followed, a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion washed over her. She'd escaped, but she knew they would be back, relentless as ever. To them, the idea of a human girl outsmarting them on their own turf was intolerable. Resting against the cool metal wall, Mira caught her breath and let the gravity of it all sink in. Nebula Academy wasn't just any school. It was a proving ground, a place that forced everyone, no matter their species, to test their limits. But Mira hadn't come here to fit in or to meet their expectations. She was here to defy them. She pushed off the wall, a fierce spark igniting in her eyes. This was only the beginning, and her rivals had no idea what she was truly capable of. As her pulse steadied, she began to plan her next move. Rack, Lyra, and Voss weren't going to let this go. The elite at Nebula Academy were molded to endure, trained to be unyielding, and these three were no exception. Each encounter with Maya was an opportunity to prove something to themselves, to the other students, and to a universe watching from afar. Nebula Academy wasn't just any school. It was a forge, a place where future leaders, tacticians, and warriors sharpened their skills. And Mira, or Maya, was the odd one out, the only human among them. To her peers, she wasn't a fellow student, but rather a question mark. Why would a human, from a species still striving to achieve half of what the Zuran, Sueon, or Vor had accomplished, be here? It was a question that lingered in Myra's mind during late nights when the excitement and fear of being here left her heart racing. But she was determined not to let her rivals sense even a shadow of doubt. If they wanted a spectacle, she'd give them one. She might not know every rule of this game, but survival was a skill she knew well. Growing up in the slums of Earth's lower sectors, navigating crumbling buildings, and leaping across decaying skyscrapers, she had honed her instincts. Compared to that, Nebula Academy's sleek, glass corridors were practically child's play. Taking a deep breath, she was momentarily grounded by the soft hum of the Academy's atmospheric stabilizers, a constant reminder of just how far she was from home. The Academy orbited at just the right distance from its star, casting an eternal twilight inside. The ambient light lent a metallic sheen to everything, underscoring the alien nature of her surroundings. Myra's brief moment of peace ended when a figure emerged from a doorway down the hall. She tensed, expecting Rack or one of his followers, but instead, it was the last person she'd anticipated. Sinjin, the Academy's most elusive instructor, notorious for his intense lessons on advanced strategy and psychological warfare. To the students, he was a ghost, appearing without warning, vanishing without a trace, and leaving behind only grim insights into the universe. Mira Vega, he greeted her, his voice low but cutting through the corridor's stillness. His eyes, hidden behind slim, dark lenses, observed her with a detached interest. "Walk with me for a moment." She hesitated, but when he raised an eyebrow, she sensed it was more a command than a request. Reluctantly, she fell into step beside him, her senses on high alert. They moved in silence, the corridor gradually darkening as they left the Academy's central areas behind. Mira stole a glance at him, wondering why he'd chosen now to approach her. Finally, his voice broke the silence. "You're making waves, Maya. The Academy hasn't seen a human since, well, let's just say it's been a long time." Sinjin smirked, but it was a cold expression, lacking any warmth. "Why do you think you're here?" Mira didn't have a clear answer, and she wasn't about to give him any reason to doubt her. "Because I deserve to be," she replied steadily, though the words felt more like a question than an assertion. Sinjin chuckled, the sound echoing slightly in the narrow hall. "Deserve? That's an interesting choice. The Academy doesn't care what we believe we deserve. It cares only about what we can prove." He paused, turning to face her directly, his gaze piercing even behind his dark lenses. "You've made an impression, but impressions fade. Are you willing to give up everything to show you belong here?" Myra's throat tightened, caught off guard by the question. "Wait, what do you mean, everything?" "Nebula is a crucible, Mira. Every student here understands we're not just learning combat or theories. We're being remade, stripped down and rebuilt from the ground up. To belong, you must let go of all attachments, especially," he hesitated, assessing her, "those stubborn notions of pride and defiance you hold onto so tightly." Mira clenched her fists. Sinjin's words cut right to the core of something she'd felt but never voiced. Her pride and defiance had been her armor, her drive. They'd gotten her off the streets and through life's harshest trials, leading her all the way here. She couldn't simply let that go. "Without those ideas," she said, barely managing to keep her voice steady, "I'm nothing." "Exactly," he replied, a hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. "That's what you need to understand, Mira. Here at Nebula, pride is a weakness. Defiance can be useful, but only if you're in control. If it controls you, it becomes a liability." His words stung more than she wanted to admit. Mira turned away, swallowing the retort on the tip of her tongue. There was a hard truth in Sinjin's words, one she couldn't fully deny, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. They had reached the end of the corridor, which opened into a vast training arena. The space was empty, the lights dimmed except for the faint glow of holographic projectors along the walls. Sinjin gestured toward the center of the arena, his face unreadable. "Show me," he said simply. Myra's pulse quickened as she took in the arena, realizing she didn't know what he expected. The holographic projectors whirred to life, casting various landscapes. A cliffside, a dense jungle, a winding cityscape. Sinjin's eyes bore into her, unrelenting. "This is a simulation," Sinjin explained, his tone flat and disinterested. "It's designed to adapt to your abilities and push you to your limits. I want to see just how far you'll go to survive. But remember, if you fail, you'll be on your own." The landscapes blurred, merging into an alien scene, an endless metallic desert under a darkened sky, with towering monoliths casting shadows across the terrain. A faint wind whistled through the arena, artificial but eerily convincing. The vastness of it, the heavy silence, felt unsettlingly real. Before she could fully prepare, the simulation launched into motion. Mira broke into a sprint, instincts sharp as the ground shifted beneath her. The metallic sand transformed into slick metal panels, forcing her to adjust her steps carefully. One wrong move and she'd be on the ground, a weakness Sinjin would undoubtedly notice. Ahead, she spotted a narrow gap between two monoliths, just wide enough to slip through. But as she approached, the ground trembled, and the monoliths began to close, their edges sparking with crackling energy. Without hesitating, Mira dove forward, sliding through the narrowing space. Heat brushed her back as the monoliths sealed shut behind her. Breathless, she pushed herself to her feet and pressed on, scanning her surroundings for the next obstacle. The simulation was relentless. Every corner revealed new threats, walls shifting in her path, hidden pits, sudden bursts of artificial flames. Mira navigated each challenge with the practiced precision of someone who'd spent her life adapting to the unpredictable. Her body moved automatically, her mind and instincts perfectly aligned, almost as if she were a machine. She didn't stop to think, she simply reacted. Yet, even as she tackled each trial, Sinjin's words echoed in her mind. What did it truly mean to give up everything? To abandon the pride that had fueled her survival all this time? The question gnawed at her, more unsettling than any danger the simulation threw her way. As the landscape shifted once more, she found herself staring up at a towering cliff of smooth metal, its surface cold and unyielding. Midway up, a narrow ledge was visible, but the climb was steep and the path unclear. Her heart pounded as she reached for the first handhold. Her grip slipped, and she cursed under her breath. On Earth, she would know exactly where to place her hands, how to balance her weight. Here, everything was unfamiliar, each surface too smooth, every angle too sharp. Halfway up, her fingers began to ache, her muscles straining against the unfamiliar terrain. Doubt flickered within her, the unsettling thought that maybe she wouldn't make it. And with it came the question, if pride was her weakness, then what did she truly have left? Shaking her head, she forced the doubt aside. This wasn't the moment for questions. Not here, not with Sinjin watching her every move. But even as she continued the climb, that small voice in the back of her mind lingered, whispering that perhaps she was out of her depth. Maybe she didn't belong here after all. Reaching the top of the cliff, Mira collapsed onto the ledge, gasping for breath. To her surprise, Sinjin stood there as if he'd been waiting for her. His face was unreadable, though there was a faint glint in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or maybe amusement. "Is that it?" he asked, his tone razor-sharp. "Is that all you've got?" Mira clenched her fists and forced herself to stand, meeting his gaze with a face flushed from exhaustion and anger. "I'm not finished." Sinjin's smirk faded, replaced by a look of cool assessment. "Good, because this is just the beginning." He turned and signaled her to follow. As they left the arena, Mira noticed her hands trembling, not from the physical strain but from the weight of his words. She was beginning to understand that Sinjin wasn't merely testing her strength or speed. He was pushing her to let go, to transform into something entirely new, something she wasn't sure she wanted to become. The academy's corridors seemed darker, more stifling as they walked in silence. Finally, Sinjin stopped at an unmarked door. Placing his hand on a scanner, he unlocked it, revealing a dimly lit room filled with data consoles. "This," he said, gesturing to the room, "is where you start to learn the truth." Mira hesitated, an uneasy feeling tugging at her. The truth? For a brief moment, Sinjin's icy expression softened, a hint of something almost human breaking through. "The academy wasn't designed just to make you the best of your kind, Mira. It was created to make you question everything, even the things that define your humanity." Myra's heart pounded as she stepped inside. Holographic images covered the walls, displaying planets, wars, civilizations, some familiar, others utterly alien. In the center of the room was a single console pulsing softly. Sinjin approached the console and tapped a series of commands. The images shifted until Mira found herself staring at Earth, its blue-green surface looking small and vulnerable against the vastness of space. What is this?" she murmured. Sinjin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned toward her, his gaze intense. "This is why you're here, Mira, to understand that there's a cost for holding on to your humanity. To see that if you want to survive in this academy, in this universe, you have to be willing to sacrifice everything, even your most deeply held beliefs." She stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a heavy cloak. All her life, she had fought to hold on to her pride, her defiance, the very things that shaped her. But now, faced with Sinjin's challenge, she felt something unravel within her. For the first time, Mira questioned if she was ready to let it all go. As Mira stood in the dimly lit room, Sinjin's words bore down on her, heavy as planetary gravity. She felt utterly drained, physically from the simulation, and mentally from the relentless questions swirling in her mind. The flickering image of Earth on the console felt farther away than ever, a distant reminder of how much she had left behind and how much she had changed. Sinjin watched her closely, an almost satisfied gleam in his eyes that grated against her resolve. She could feel her confidence slipping, her pride and everything she had once relied on fraying under the weight of this place and its expectations. She looked again at the hologram of Earth, thinking of the life she'd left behind, the friends, the streets she'd once roamed with purpose. Here, at Nebula Academy, all of that had been stripped away. Her instincts, her skills, her very sense of self had been tested, and in some ways shattered. Yet she felt that there was still something deeper she needed to grasp, something beyond mere survival, something Sinjin and the Academy seemed intent on drawing her toward. Turning to Sinjin, who stood beside her in silent scrutiny, she asked, "What is this Academy really for?" Her voice was steady, but a flicker of unease churned in her gut. gut. Sinjin tilted his head as if assessing her readiness. The academy isn't here to make you stronger. It's here to prepare you for a choice. He gestured at the holographic Earth, which shifted to show hundreds of other worlds, some thriving with life, others barren, scarred by war or disaster. The universe is vast, Mira, and nearly everyone here, the Sueon, the Zurin, the Vor, they all have one thing in common. He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle over her. Myra's mind raced, sensing she was on the brink of a revelation. They know what's coming, he continued, his voice almost a whisper. It's a cycle repeating every few millennia, a reset, a rebalancing. This academy, it's a filter. We bring together the strongest minds from across the galaxy, searching for those who can comprehend the stakes and make the right choice when the time arrives. Myra's heart pounded. What choice? Sinjin's gaze was sharper than ever, piercing her with cold intensity. The choice to preserve what we are or to evolve, to let the universe reset, rewriting itself and every species within it. In time, you would have seen, Mira, that this is about more than survival. It's about choosing the way forward. The Academy's purpose is to prepare one among you to decide the future for all. Myra's mind spun, the words surreal, like an ancient myth come to life, a universe reset, with the fate of every species hinging on a single choice. She shook her head, struggling to absorb it. So, you're saying you want me to choose whether we continue as we are or allow everything to be rewritten? Sinjin's lips curved slightly, though his expression remained devoid of warmth. It's not about what I want, Mira. It's about what you're capable of understanding. That's why we test you, break you down. Only by removing every layer can you see clearly, free from illusions of pride or identity. Anger surged within her, momentarily piercing through the confusion. So everything I've been through, the isolation, the risks, the humiliation, was just a twisted way to force me to see things differently? Yes, he replied bluntly, because once those illusions are gone, you're no longer limited by what you once were. You become capable of understanding what truly matters. His words settled heavily upon her, and for the first time, Mira found herself questioning everything she'd held onto. She had always believed that her strength lay in defiance, in clinging to her identity against all odds. But now, standing on the edge of a decision that could shape the fate of countless worlds, she wondered if that defiance had been a barrier blinding her all along. She turned back to the holographic display, watching the universe unfold before her, worlds full of life, vast stretches of emptiness, the silent voids between. As she watched, a thought formed, clear and unyielding. She could choose to preserve things as they were, clinging to her understanding of humanity and the life she'd known, or she could accept the reset, embrace the unknown, and allow the universe to begin anew, freed from the weight of everything that had come before. A calm settled over her as she turned to Sinjin. I understand, she murmured. Sinjin's face remained impassive, but she caught a faint flicker in his eyes, maybe even a hint of respect. And your decision? He asked. Mira took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every struggle and lesson pressing on her, yet also sensing an unusual clarity, as if a fog had lifted from her mind. I choose, she hesitated, the finality of her decision settling over her with striking simplicity. I choose to let go, to allow the reset. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Sinjin watched her, then, slowly, he nodded, his eyes closing briefly in acceptance. As he opened them again, Mira felt an odd sensation, as though the ground beneath her was shifting. The images on the holographic display flickered and then vanished, and the room itself seemed to pulse, as if the Academy were responding to her choice. Before she could react, everything around her faded to darkness, and she felt herself slipping, as if being pulled backward through time and space. The feeling was both terrifying and freeing, a final release from all she had known, every memory, every experience. In that instant, Mira understood the true weight of her decision, not only for herself but for the entire universe. By letting go, she had set something monumental in motion, a force that would erase all traces of her existence. Every battle, every bond. She would be forgotten, her story wiped clean as the universe prepared to begin anew. Yet, as her awareness dissolved, she felt a profound peace. In the end, she had been right. Nebula Academy wasn't about survival or proving strength. It was about understanding, and then surrendering that understanding. The universe would continue without her, without memory of this choice, of this moment. And in that silence, there was a rare perfection, a boundless freedom she had never imagined. In the vast, silent depths of space, the Academy flickered out of existence, leaving only the quiet stars behind.